Hiroo Onoda. During World War II in 1945, when America invaded the Lubang Island of the Philippines, only 4 Japanese soldiers survived, including the second lieutenant, Hiroo Onoda. The Second World War ended soon enough, but Hiroo Onoda fought for 29 years after the Japanese surrendered, until 1974, to defend the island from the invaders and carry out his duties. World War II ended in 1945 for everyone else, but Onoda fought the war for 3 decades. He lived off the land in the jungle and conducted guerrilla attacks against the local population. Today, we are here to talk about Hiroo Onoda, the man who fought World War II for 3 decades after it ended. Before we get into details, please like and subscribe to Immersive History, and remember to press the bell icon. In 1924, Onoda joined the Japanese army and was selected for guerrilla combat training. Onoda was trained as an intelligence officer and commando. He was sent to Lubang Island in the Philippines. His mission was to destroy the Lubang airfield and appear by the harbor. He was also instructed to destroy enemy planes and crews that attempted to land on the island. Things took a turn at the last moment when the officials changed his orders. It was decided that the targets would not be exploded, and this change in the plan allowed the Americans to invade Lubang easily in 1945. Onoda's mission failed, and the invaders took control of the island. He and his fellows then moved to the jungle. Onoda's fellow soldiers died as the war continued, until only 3 men were left. Onoda was their highest-ranking officer, so he took control of his squad. He strictly instructed his fellows not to surrender or attempt suicide, and to fight the American and Filipino forces till their last breath. The war soon ended, and Japan surrendered on 15 August 1945. The news reached Lubang, but Onoda and the 3 remaining servicemen considered it fake. They thought it was a strategy to lure them out of their hiding places. The squad remained hidden in the jungle among the wilderness and fed on banana skins, stolen rice, and coconuts. The 3 soldiers were just as dedicated as Onoda. They continued to fight the World War for years after it ended, but soon they died one by one until only Onoda was left. The first one to fall was Private Akatsu. Akatsu surrendered to the Filipino authorities 5 years after the World War ended. The next one was Corporal Shimada. In 1954, Shimada was shot by a patrol looking out for Onoda and his men. The last officer to die was Private First Class Kozuka. Nearly 2 decades after the Japanese surrendered, Kozuka was on a mission to burn local crops when the police killed him. Onoda became a wild man who occasionally came out of the jungle to attack the locals, farmers, and the police for decades. Later, Onoda justified his actions as war tactics for the war he believed was still going on. He destroyed things, threatened people, and lit fires in empty houses. When the soldiers ran to the jungle, they weren't ready to fight the World War for 3 decades. They didn't have supplies to live on, but they were trained to survive in any condition. Their primary food intake was fruit and vegetables from the wilderness, and occasionally cows they stole from farmers. They lived in huts made out of bamboo and maintained their uniforms and weapons in a disciplined way. The most important fact is that the group refused to believe any news regarding the end of the war and the progression of the modern world. When there was no news about Onoda after the war was ended, Onoda was declared dead by the Japanese government in 1959. But once the news of the death of PFC Kozuka broke, the pressure on the government increased as they had to reevaluate the position and the world situation. This was when they considered the possibility of Onoda still being alive. Now came when he was starting to be dealt with as an urban myth that became quite intriguing for the nation. The myth and exciting story of Onoda was always a matter of mystery for the country. And it was in 1974 that a young man named Norio Suzuki announced his quest to find the mystery soldier. He was firm on finding the lieutenant, a panda, and an abominable snowman. It was a matter of surprise that Suzuki successfully found the long-lost lieutenant, Onoda. Also, Onoda being persistent on the fact that the war might still be ongoing might be very hard to convince and accept the idea that the war might be over. Even though Onoda spared Suzuki and decided he won't kill him, he was still consistent that he would not drop his mission until he got an order from his official commander. Knowing that he couldn't convince Onoda to abandon his mission just by his words, Suzuki returned to Japan to find Onoda's commander. Suzuki was fortunate enough to find the former commander, Major Taniguchi, working in a bookstore at the time. After telling him the whole situation of Onoda, Suzuki and Onoda's brother took the former commander to Onoda in Lubang Island so that he could accept that the war had ended decades ago. Along with Onoda, many other soldiers had a tough time believing the war was over. Therefore, it was challenging to convince the lieutenant, given his decades of surviving in the jungle, knowing that he was still fighting for his country. He thought that all of this might be an elaborate trick on the enemy's behalf to make him surrender or catch him. This is why he kept waiting for the former commander, Taniguchi, to slip him some secret message that might confirm his belief that the war hadn't ended yet. Once Onoda realized that there wasn't any secret message from the commander, he surrendered and blacked out when he knew the war had ended 29 years ago. Considering the extent of the unbelievable news, Onoda seemed to take it all pretty well. Onoda's surrender seemed quite tricky because of his behavior in the jungle and its surroundings. He had been terrorizing the people living in the nearby area for decades. Not only that, but he was also charged with the murder of at least 7 Filipino citizens. Onoda was lucky enough to be forgiven of all these criminal charges because the president of the Philippines was quite impressed by his heroic survival in the jungle for such a long time. Wowed by Onoda's heroism and will, he was granted full relief. Onoda was dressed up in his uniform that he had been in for decades and presented his sword to the president of the Philippines because of the appreciation he received from him. But he respectfully declined the offering and gave him his sword back. Onoda was a hero of Japan and received a welcome that a hero should, with 8,000 people, including his parents, cheering him when his private plane landed in Japan in 1974. Corporal Shimada's daughter was also present in the crowd. He was one of the troops killed decades ago. Japanese media was drooling over Onoda, writing about him, interviewing him, and portraying him as a hero to the whole nation. He was represented as an inspirational figure to the youth who had grown materialistic in the years of Onoda's absence. He also wrote a book titled No Surrender that contained his struggles and survival of him in the jungle for decades. The life of modern Japan quickly became quite overwhelming for him because he was not used to the luxuries and technologies that were introduced over the past years. This is why he decided to live his life more simply as a cattle farmer and shifter to his brother in a Japanese community in Brazil. Being old school, he was compelled to marry a woman who taught old Japanese customs. Onoda's return to Japan was majorly dependent on the incident of a 19-year-old kid who murdered his parents because of the dread of telling them that he couldn't get into college. He decided to return to his country and set up a camp to help troubled children. He was confident enough and had the skills that could help disturbed kids. The name of the camp was Onoda's Nature Camp, and this was the place where Onoda taught survival skills through his experience. Moreover, he also gave lectures on the philosophy of life in various colleges and universities. Even though Onoda refused the 29 years of payment that he owed the government, he had enough royalties from his book and a sufficient pension. He refused people's donations to him and gave them to Shinoda Memorial Shrine if he couldn't return them somehow. Living an exceptional and heroic life, Onoda died in 2014. Onoda was the type of soldier who was committed to their duty and didn't back off no matter what. They are taught to survive in all conditions, and they do so even if the world gets tight on them. He was the epitome of sheer will and tenacity. Can you even believe those 13 years spent by this hero in a jungle with no supplies to survive? Do you have enough will to do any of it? If you like this video, give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel for more.